A calculating, faceless monster is turning the dark industrial underbelly of a great American city into a personal butcher shop, and not even the nation's most famous lawman can stop the slaughter. The year is 1935. The crushing weight of the Great Depression has gripped the city of Cleveland, Ohio, turning the industrial ravine known as Kingsbury Run into a desperate wasteland of shantytowns. Thousands of displaced workers and rail-riding transients drift into the city lines looking for a shred of hope. Amidst the heavy smog and the constant clatter of boxcars, these forgotten citizens find refuge in numbers, looking out for one another in a community built entirely on shared hardship. But a cold, methodical predator is already moving through the soot-stained ravines, completely undetected. A killer with an advanced knowledge of human anatomy is preparing an unprecedented reign of terror that will leave 12 official victims brutally dismembered, an entire metropolis paralyzed by dread, and a permanent scar on American law enforcement. The ripples of these grim discoveries would permanently derail the career of America's most legendary investigator and forever alter how modern cities police their streets. It began on September 23, 1935, when the decapitated, surgically drained bodies of two men were discovered together in the brush of Kingsbury Run. As more remains were uncovered over the next 3 years, coroners realized they were dealing with a highly skilled sadist who executed clean, precise post-mortem disarticulation of the joints. Safety Director Eliot Ness, fresh off his celebrated takedown of Al Capone in Chicago, faced a defining crisis. He deployed off-the-books undercover detectives dressed as hobos to ride the rails, but the killer remained invisible. And when the remains of 2 more victims were intentionally left in a dump site directly visible from Ness's downtown office window, the taunt forced a desperate escalation. Ness personally led a massive midnight police raid on August 18, 1938, arresting hundreds of transients and burning the entire Kingsbury Run shantytown to the ground to strip the killer of his cover. The prime suspect, an alcoholic surgeon named Dr. Francis Sweeney, was secretly detained and interrogated by Ness for days, failing early polygraph tests. But because Sweeney was the first cousin of one of Ness's most aggressive political opponents, a formal prosecution was impossible. The suspect committed himself to an asylum, the investigation collapsed into a storm of civil rights criticism, and the killer vanished from history. The next year, the Cleveland Police Department establishes a centralized cross-district forensic fingerprinting bureau to identify nameless victims across state lines. 10 years later, federal agencies rewrite the structural handbook on profiling transient killers, abandoning localized street tracking for comprehensive interstate records. Every decade, the American perception of the urban inner city shifts from a place of industrial opportunity to a landscape of unseen danger. The open shantytowns are replaced by heavily patrolled, fenced-off industrial zones. Forensic science prioritizes chemical trace evidence over eyewitness testimony. As the bodies continued to stack up, the investigation turned into a bleak showcase of primitive forensics failing against modern malice. The city's police force was completely unequipped for a predator who left no clothing, no identification, and no crime scenes. County Coroner Samuel Gerber was forced to pioneer early methods of skeletal reconstruction and dental matching just to identify the few victims they could. The case proved that standard 1930s police work, built on local beat cops and neighborhood informants, was entirely useless against an anonymous killer moving through an anonymous population. It exposed a terrifying reality. A brilliant predator could use the chaos of industrial decay as a perfect shield. But what if Eliot Ness had secured the evidence to put Dr. Francis Sweeney on trial in 1938? What if the politics of Cleveland had allowed for a transparent, high-profile conviction? Without that public law enforcement failure, Ness's career wouldn't have suffered the devastating blow that ultimately drove him from public safety. And more importantly, the highly criticized, brutal destruction of the homeless camps wouldn't have been recorded as a desperate act of failure, but as a tactical victory. The modern approach to urban zoning and the immediate criminalization of transient communities might have taken a completely different, less aggressive trajectory across the American Rust Belt. And what about you? If you were leading the city of Cleveland during the height of the panic in 1938, would you have authorized Eliot Ness to burn down the shantytowns to flush out a monster, or would you have protected the civil liberties of the citizens? Share it in the comments below, and if you would like to explore more of these ripples in history and in life, please hit subscribe and join me on the Ripple Trace.